All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Amir Badat. I am the Southern States Director and Senior Advisor at Fair Fight. Fair Fight Action is a nationally recognized leader and Georgia-based nonprofit that fights for free and fair elections. We fight against voter suppression. We expose anti-voter policies. We work to protect and expand voting rights, and we engage individual voters at a grassroots level, supporting pro-voter candidates and convening civic engagement organizations to ensure elections are free and fair because every vote and every voice matters. Tonight, we are thrilled to have you here with us for Fair Fight Together. We recognize that for many of us, this moment is fraught with tension and concern. And in the face of the challenges ahead of us, we remain unwavering in our mission. And this series, Fair Fight Together, is one of the efforts that we are bringing to the forefront to bring our community together to support, educate, and motivate each other because we need each other in these moments, in these dark times. Tonight's event is the fourth of a regular series where we will gather with our friends, our supporters, activists, advocates from all across the country, all of those who support an America by and for the people. We all have more power and agency than we may feel like we do, and together we will find the path forward. And so with that, I want to talk a little bit about tonight's event, which will feature two incredible and highly esteemed legal experts, Norm Eisen, American attorney, author, and former diplomat, and Alex Aronson, the executive director of the Court Accountability Project. We are incredibly excited to have you both as part of this important and powerful conversation. And this engaging discussion will explore critical legal issues and their impact on our democracy. I'll talk a little bit more about our panelists in a second. First, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. We welcome your questions. We received a ton of questions ahead of tonight, many of which we will be posing to our speakers. If you have a question during the conversation, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we will do our very best to address as many of those questions as we can. If you are distracted by the chat because of all of the questions that are going to be posted there, you can manually turn it off on your screen. You can also use closed captioning by turning it on at the bottom of your screen. And finally, we will be sending out a recap of the Zoom. And so if you feel like you need to hit rewind and catch one of those nuggets of wisdom that our panelists are going to drop tonight, then you will have the recording and all of the links that we will post in the chat. And with that, I am delighted to introduce our distinguished guests. First, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Norm Eisen. He is the executive chair of Democracy Defenders Fund, a globally recognized authority on law, ethics, and anti-corruption. He served as special counsel to the House Judiciary Committee for the Trump impeachment from February 2019 to February 2020, and he is the author of several pieces. He's the author of A Case for the American People, The United States versus Donald J. Trump, and The Last Palace, Europe's Turbulent Century in 5 Lives and One Legendary House. And he is also the editor of Democracy's Defenders, U.S. Embassy Prague, The Fall of Communism in Czechoslovakia and Its Aftermath, as well as Overcoming Trumpery, How to Restore Ethics, the Rule of Law, and Democracy. As you can tell, Ambassador Eisen is the perfect person to be talking with us tonight. He served in the White House from January 2009 to January 2011 as special counsel and special assistant to the president for ethics and government reform, and he was the U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic from 2011 to 2014. So welcome, Norm. We're really excited to have you here. Next, I would like to introduce Alex Aronson. Alex is the co-founder and executive director of Court Accountability. He is a political organizer, civil rights lawyer, researcher, commentator, and judicial ethics expert. Alex's work on dark money, judicial influence, and court accountability has helped elevate these issues to national prominence, informing today's headlines and driving congressional action. He has served as chief counsel and senior counsel to U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Managing Director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection at Georgetown University Law Center, and an attorney in the appellate section of the Civil Rights Division at the DOJ. He has been a litigation associate at Covington and Burling, a law clerk to Judge Albert Diaz on the Fourth Circuit, and his commentary has appeared in multiple outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico, and several others. And so we are very, very excited to have both of these esteemed panelists join us tonight. All right, with that, I want to kick off our conversation to address kind of what seems to be at the top of mind for many people who are joining us here tonight. So a lot of the questions that we got in expressed a high level of concern about the current political situation we're facing in this country. People are worried about the erosion of our democratic institutions, about our basic rights being taken away, and there is an intense desire for guidance on how to effectively respond to these threats. Alex and Norm, you both are seasoned attorneys, former government officials, experts on government ethics. Can you tell us what lessons you have learned from your experience doing this work that could be useful for us as a country, as a society, as we fight to protect our democracy and our rights? And I'll start off with you, Norm.
Well, I'm even more heavily seasoned and salted and pounded, fried and sizzled than Alex. So I'll go first. It's such an honor to be here with. I believe in using dad jokes as a weapon in the fight against autocracy. It's such an honor to be here with you, Amir, and our Fair Fight friends. Amir and I are veterans of other battles together. To share the hour with Alex, who is such a wonderful colleague and does so many good things on his own and occasionally in partnership with us at Democracy Defenders Fund, at Democracy Defenders Action. I started those organizations to prepare for this moment. I actually started them, and I worked very closely with Fair Fight in the run-up, and Lauren Grow-Wargo, who, of course, is now the head of Fair Fight once more, is a co-founder of these democracy defender organizations. All the folks who beat back the attempted coup in 2017, my job in 2016 and 2017 was to represent states that were under assault, governors, AGs, secretaries of state, the state themselves. We defeated the attempted coup. And on January 7th, 2017, I reached out to Lauren and a few other friends. Guys, you think the coup is over? No such luck. We're at great risk. I don't know where it will strike again, but it's going to strike again. This poison has been unleashed into the body politic. So I've been, in a sense, I had been preparing for January 20th, 2025 since 21. I said attempted coup of, I meant the attempted coup of 20 and 21. I had been preparing for 4 years for this moment that we were in. And despite that, the shock to the body politic, I wrote a piece for the New York Times shortly before January 20th. Are we sleepwalking as a country into autocracy? We have to wake up. And the difference, I guess the way I would answer your question about the moment we're in, Donald Trump started the first 100 days with incredible momentum and really a climate of passivity, timidity, and fear. He had just brought all these billionaires and media companies to heel. and he did flood the zone. But a hardy group of litigators, and Alex is one of this community, this coalition, was ready to take him on. And we met Donald Trump's flood the zone with rule of law, shock and awe. And Amir, that has had a series of knock on effects. The end result, we'll talk more about this tonight, and fair fight is such an important part of this. The end result of those years of preparation was 100 years, 100 days of fight, and Donald Trump lost those first 100 days. As we are here tonight, I won't say democracy won because the damage has been vast. It's only the first round of, there'll be 14 more 100-day rounds of a heavyweight championship fight. As a seasoned fighter, I've been doing this in one form or another since 1985. I had my first law job, pre-law job in 1985. I've never had an experience. I've had thousands of trial days, court days. I've never had an experience like the past 100 days. And the furious battle that we started in the courts have spread to all of the areas of democracy. We caused Donald Trump to lose the first 100 days. So as I sit here tonight, the moment we're in, I think the momentum has switched, and it's democracy that that has the momentum. Even though Donald Trump, very dangerous and devastating. Look at the wins in the past 24 hours alone. North Carolina, election denial defeated, Supreme Court race. We'll talk about that tonight, 7-month battle. Ed Martin, Trump's nominee for U.S. attorney, perhaps his most dangerous nominee, defeated, replaced newly emboldened Republicans in the Senate standing up to Trump. What? The last point, replaced by Trump's most ridiculous nominee, Judge Janine. So, long way to go. Trump lost the first 100 days. We have the momentum.
Thanks, Norm. That's a really useful, I think, recap of the first 100 days, and also an encouraging message, I think, for folks to hear, because we see so much of the shock and awe coming from the Trump administration, or the Trump regime, I think is a better way of describing it. Alex, let me ask you, kind of tell us about how your experience has informed the past 100 days. What is your kind of take of where we're situated right now?
Yeah, thank you so much, Amir and Norm, for the kind words, and Fair Fight for hosting us today. It's an honor to be with you, and I'm such a huge fan of Fair Fight, going back to my days as a Senate staffer working with the Fair Fight team, who uniquely at that time had a focus on Leonard Leo, the right-wing dark money impresario who is responsible for our 6-3 ultra-conservative Supreme Court majority. So deeply grateful for all of your work through the years and for this opportunity to be with you all here today. Norm has been standing at the vanguard with this crew of litigators, this courageous crew of litigators at no small risk, right? He's become a target of President Trump himself. And this is the conflict, right? They are coming with shock and awe to chill and suppress speech and dissent. And Norm, fairly uniquely among all of American civil society, has led the charge in confronting that. So true heroism in the face of autocracy and authoritarianism, and it cannot be applauded enough. And I think one thing that I think this week is such a wonderful time for us to be gathering and having this conversation because of these wins, because of these proof points of how we can confront autocracy by pushing back against it really courageously and forcefully. The North Carolina Supreme Court, the Ed Martin nomination that Norm mentioned. I'll even go so far as to include the selection in the Vatican today of a pope that was not the pope that Leonard Leo and his money network was organizing aggressively to influence the selection of. I came to this work as a lawyer. I was at the Justice Department, working in the Senate Judiciary Committee during the first Trump administration, trying to stop the nominations to the courts, where the Senate had become a conveyor belt for the confirmation of extremist radicals, movement warriors from the right to the bench, which to my mind was creating an existential crisis for democracy that was separate and apart, but also deeply connected to Trump and the MAGA movement. And so, as I look at the moment we're in, I think that as important as all this litigation is to not only disrupt and stop and slow down the Trump MAGA agenda, but to set clear parameters for other important stakeholders in our society that there is the rule of law, it must be respected, and if they go so far as to defy it, which I think we'll get into tonight, that cannot stand, and we will no longer have a constitutional republic. And in many respects, I think you could argue that we don't have one today, that we are in a period of post-constitutional collapse, of constitutional collapse and crisis, and that we are in a constitutional moment that requires reconceptualization of how we as the people, this is a lay document, it's not a lawyer's document, how we can take ownership of this Constitution. And to do that, I think it's really important to reckon with the structural and financial forces that have brought us to this moment, very much centering the Supreme Court and the Roberts Court and the agenda that they have been driving, which very clearly laid the groundwork in important respects for what Trump is doing today. And so I think the frame that I'm thinking about this moment in is less about protecting democracy, because in my estimation, we've never really had a democracy, a functional democracy in this country, a fair and equal, pluralistic, multiracial democracy. And the democracy that we have had has been steadily eroding year after year, mostly under the direction of the Roberts Court, including cases like Citizens United and the flood of dark money into our politics, Rucho and allowing gerrymandering to take place without any federal restriction, and of course, gutting the Voting Rights Act, but a whole host of cases that have weakened and eroded democracy through the years, and that have structurally, in terms of constitutional power, taken the people's power, placed it in an unaccountable judicial branch, and empowered what we now have is a mad, tyrannical king who is claiming broad executive powers that the Supreme Court they gave him last year. And so that's how we're thinking about the moment, and how we think about confronting it is through a block and build strategy. It's an anti-authoritarian strategy that incorporates litigation and expose and research work, other disruption to stop the autocrats, and then a building agenda that really looks to the future and the better systems and communities and networks and constitutional reality we can create once we get through this dark moment.
I think that's such an important point, Alex, because we all have heard the phrase with every crisis comes opportunity. I think your point is really important that the democracy that we've had in this country has never served vast segments of our society. And so everything that's going on right now is terrible, but there is an opportunity to rebuild this country and this democracy in a way that actually does serve most of the people in this country. And I want to come back to that in a few minutes and think about what is an affirmative agenda and what goes into an affirmative agenda when we're thinking about rebuilding. Let me pull on some of the threads that you guys have already raised. One of them being kind of this shock and awe strategy that we've seen. One of the defining features, I think, of the Trump regime during these first few months has been just this blitzkrieg of executive orders that the White House has issued on topics ranging from voting to immigration to education. Can you help us understand a little bit how Trump is doing this? Are these executive orders legal? How have they been challenged in court, and how do those challenges fare? And then more generally, what are the implications of this expansive use of executive authority on the separation of powers and checks and balances? I'll start with Alex.
Oh, really? You just wound me all up. Well, first thing, I think it's worth noting this executive order strategy, this was Project 2025. This is what it called for. You could think of it as a parallel in some ways to the way that the right-wing legal movement has advanced a substantive policy agenda through the judicial branch. because this is stuff that nobody wants. Even as Trump was running for president and successfully, winning this presidency, he distanced himself from this agenda. It's deeply unpopular and toxic. They knew they could never achieve it through the legislative process, and so they're relying on unilateral executive actions to try to accomplish it. With executive orders, I think it's important that we are really clear about what they are and what they are not. They are presidential directives that are binding on the executive branch. They are rooted in law. They should be rooted in law, in some constitutional power of the president or in some power that a statute provides. And they are judicially and politically checkable. You can sue to stop them. The courts can strike them down, and the president should not be able to implement them after that. We'll see how that all plays out. They are not law. They are not federal regulation. They are not binding on states or private citizens that they purport to, purport to bind. So now here we are with, and I think I'll let Norm speak to the incredible litigation that has stopped so many of these executive orders in the lower courts. We've had, I think it was as of May 1st, 200 lower court orders stopping these executive orders. But this is going to be the question, are they legal? They're doing crazy stuff, right? Russ Vought, who runs the Office of Management and Budget, is a radical white Christian nationalist, post-constitutionalist, he calls himself. He doesn't think that they can be constrained. They're claiming the Congress's power of the purse in impounding funds that Congress has appropriated. They're rewriting the 14th Amendment to end birthright citizenship, deporting people without due process. I know we're going to get into the anti-voter executive order. All this stuff is flagrantly illegal. People are going to sue. It's going to be stopped because it is. And then we're going to have big fights at the Supreme Court, which is going to bring us into this important dynamic whereby the court's majority and Project 2025 share many of the same near-term and long-term goals.
Norm, do you want to jump in?
Well, out of that landscape of cases, Alex, it's over 200 pieces of litigation and over 125 orders stopping illegal acts. We have worked on more than 60 just at Democracy Defenders Fund, if you include cases filed or consulted or cases where we represent one or more witnesses, and are part of this coalition that has done almost all of 200 plus cases. And often we'll partner with other democracy groups. We've filed the very first case against a Trump EO of any kind. That's Trump's Doge EO. That case was based upon I applied to be a member of the Doge. We did a huge FOIA thing during the transition, even before it launched, to get the documents, dozens of FOIA requests. And then I applied to be a member, and they very foolishly said, Norm, we don't want him. I said, but I believe and I want to fight fraud, waste, and abuse with you. Say, we don't want Norm because he's a Democrat. Oops, illegal.
Your ethics credentials are impeccable.
That was the first lawsuit. And we've been involved, and that was against the Doge. We filed the first lawsuit against the birthright citizenship, got a preliminary injunction. Trump can't pick which babies born here are and are not citizens. That's in the Constitution. That's at the that issues at the Supreme Court next week. We litigated, part of the team litigated and won against the elections EO and many, many other orders and injunctions in those 60 plus matters along the way. And sometimes you win one, it goes up to the court. We had one for probationary employees, and the court said, well, the standing is not presently adequate. Well, that was a magic word. They gave us a roadmap. Guess where we were the next morning? We were back in court. By the end of the week, we had a new order. We've protected over there and elsewhere over 25,000 federal employees. So I think we've been saved. Look at the Alien Enemies Act case. Where there I represent conservatives. We often represent conservatives because you got to have in these courts, it's a lot of Republican appointed judges who've rejected Trump. You need those conservative voices. And I represent some of the people deported and their families and whatnot. In the the Alien Enemies Act case, Donald Trump said, it's incredible. The executive order says there's an invasion, a Venezuelan invasion of the United States. I saw that. I looked out my window. I thought there was going to be a Venezuelan tank going down Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C. And in my brief, I said, I did not see a tank outside my window. So, the executive proclamations are so idiotic. Every court to address this question has rejected. Trump lost 9-0 in the Supreme Court. When Alex and I like the decisions that the Supreme Court makes, we call them the Supreme Court. When we disagree, we call them the Roberts Court. So they've earned their moniker of Supreme Court in this past 100 days. So I think this coalition, we're proud at Democracy Defenders Fund. Somebody asked how many lawyers, thousands of lawyers. I have 40, but we have hundreds of pro bono. I have 40 staff, but we have hundreds of pro bono helpers who work with us. We leverage up pro bono and low bono help. So I think that the executive orders are so stupid that they will not withstand Supreme Court review. To take one last thing, I'm going on. I'll take one last example from my docket. The Boasberg order that went up to the Supreme Court, where they said Boasberg doesn't have jurisdiction. 9-0. Even Alito and Thomas, with their insurrectionist flags and corruptly funded luxury RVs by people with business before them. Even Alito and Thomas said those people abducted from the United States soil have a right to habeas corpus proceedings. So, the greatest help we've had are these lawyers, my fellow lawyers, the orgs, the five horsemen and women of the Trump legal apocalypse, all the orgs with democracy in their title. But the second greatest helper has been Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, and their collection of corrupt clowns and criminal cronies.
That is, I think, encouraging that we're fighting an opponent that is not, doesn't have the wits that it takes to actually do this in an effective way. I think, what we saw in some of the questions that were submitted before the panel were that, there's a lot of concern about the Supreme Court. And I know, Norm, your message is that the EOs are so kind of unable to withstand legal scrutiny that even this court that we know is politicized, that we know has all of these ethical issues, even the Roberts Court would strike them down. Alex, what's your take on kind of your confidence in this court to uphold the rule of law in some of these cases that might end up before the Supreme Court? And are there some cases that, the question is not as clear cut, that where you feel like the court could do some real damage?
Yeah, I'm not quite where Norm is, and I think it really matters a lot what the issue is, what's at stake, how it fits within what we view as a very calculated political project across a lot of different issue-based sort of tracks, whether it's the effort to consolidate power in the executive branch or in the judicial branch, structural separation of powers issues, or whether it's money in politics or anti-regulatory issues, which we know that's why they are there. I think I have deep concern about what they will do on questions impacting those questions that they have independent stakes in. So there's an executive order uh, calling for the blatantly illegal under the Administrative Procedures Act to basically wipe out all these regulations across the board without notice and comment, using this exception to notice and comment that they're trying to use in utter bad faith. I don't think they'll be successful in all of their efforts to strike down those regulations, but given the priors, the anti-administrative priors of this court majority, I can see them doing a lot to get there. I think one thing that's important to keep in mind with this court is that they're always calculating. And they don't have to do everything all at once. That's John Roberts' entire MO, is that he didn't want to do it all at once. You can see it in the abortion cases, where he wanted to sort of use the standard under Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the undue burden standard, to slowly erode access to abortion. Alito had none of it. He completely wanted to just rip the Band-Aid off, take away women's right to choose, and Roberts wasn't there for that. And I think in that respect, Norm is exactly right with respect to how much of this overreach from the Trump administration they don't want to sustain, because they know that it's going to be unpopular, that it's going to create blowback, that it's going to make them look political if they go along with it. And so I think it's going to be really pick or choose. They also have, we have to remember, they have enormous control over their docket. Some of the stuff they're going to have to take, if their hand is forced, it has broad enough impact based on the posture below. Some of the stuff they're going to hold off so that they can keep their hands clean and allow things to play out elsewhere. I think that the Abrego Garcia case is a really good example of this, where they clearly don't like what Trump is doing. They want due process, but they gave him outs, right? They ruled for him 9-0, but it had these loopholes. They said you can't order him to effectuate his return. You have to make him facilitate it, and only what he can do. And surprise, surprise, the Justice Department in that case came back and said, "Oh, we did what we can, and he's never coming back."
So let me ask you about the Abrego Garcia case, and more generally, kind of this fear that Trump and the administration will not abide by court orders. We've seen this concern play out, I think, most acutely in the immigration cases, and where the administration kind of refused to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. What happens when the executive branch refuses to abide by court orders? How can we maintain a democracy if the president blatantly ignores laws and consequences, even where the Supreme Court acts in what we feel is the right way?
Well, what we've seen now is a pattern of cheating on these court orders and seeing how much they can get away with. And then at the last possible minute, they take their hand off the hot stove. So the question will be if a moment comes when they put into action the philosophy that Donald Trump articulated in his Meet the Press interview this weekend. Do you have to follow the Constitution? Donald Trump said, "I don't know." That wasn't just ignorance, Amir. He has lawyers there who are telling him that the most fundamental American constitutional idea of checks and balances, there's a case for the non-lawyers called Marbury. Even the non-lawyers have heard of Marbury versus Madison, which resolved Article 1, Congress passes the laws. Article 2, the president executes the laws, the executive branch, they follow the laws, put them into action. Article 3, the courts decide if there's a dispute about what the law means or whether it's being properly executed. So when the president says he doesn't know, he means that he is the ultimate arbiter, not what the Supreme Court says the Constitution is. That's why John Roberts just rebuked him a second time in the past few weeks. For a second time, Roberts had to rebuke him tacitly, but everybody knows who Roberts is talking about. So I think the day that Donald Trump doesn't just cheat and tiptoe and then say, okay, okay, the day that a court orders him to facilitate, and they're now playing footsie with facilitation. And Abrego Garcia, they have a record. Oh, we asked. He's a Salvadoran national in Salvador. We asked. That's the limits of our power. We all know it's not true. The ABC interview, they said to the guy, your phone is right there, Mr. Trump. Can't you pick up and call El Salvador? Yes, I could. He admitted it. Still, the day when he said, I refuse to facilitate, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and he defies the Supreme Court, that is the beginning of the end of Donald Trump, because you will see I believe you will see tens of millions of people lawfully, peacefully, vigorously in the streets. We know 80% of Americans want Donald Trump to follow court orders. So that, I think, is the end game. And that's why he's not doing it. He'd like to do it, but instead he says, well, I follow court orders, because he knows that's political poison.
Yeah, and we'll see where this ends up, particularly for some of the big ticket maneuvers they're trying to play, like impoundment. I think that's a really, really important one. It hasn't maybe been in the news quite as much lately, but it dominated the first 30, 60 days, and it remains incredibly important. Massive federal funding freezes, directly violating appropriations laws that require the expenditure of these funds, and sets up a huge constitutional conflict between the presidency and the Congress. And we'll see what happens. And Russell Vought, whom I mentioned earlier, the OMB director, who architected Project 2025 and is really steering the ship in the Trump White House and across all these agencies, when he testified at his confirmation hearing, he effectively acknowledged that what they were going to do with this impoundment plan was unconstitutional based on court precedent. So they know it's unconstitutional. They're testing the courts. And as cynical as I am about the Roberts Court, I'm kind of with Norm on this. Like, I don't think they're going to go whole hog on this. And it's so important to the Doge Trump agenda that we could be in a situation where they do this kind of outright defiance of the Supreme Court, which I agree with Norm, can and should trigger this type of mass mobilization event. We just have to be careful, right? Because they're going to be tricky with it. I think however that ruling comes down, there's going to be ways for them to work around it. There's going to be ways for them to say that they're complying with it, as they're doing in the Abrego case, the Abrego Garcia case that Norm just broke down. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is that if we're in this posture where the rule of law, we concede that the rule of law is defined by what the Roberts majority says it is, which is, if we continue to follow that kind of model of judicial supremacy over constitutional meaning that Norm explained from Marbury versus Madison, which is a sort of a debatable posture, particularly vis-a-vis laws of Congress that are signed by the president. We're in a bad spot because already we know, even if Harris had won the presidency, they were going to continue to advance a right-wing, theocratic, pro-billionaire oligarchic agenda while clamping down levers of Democratic pushback through voter suppression, more money in politics, less and less opportunity for the people to have their will reflected in their electoral participation.
Yeah, so I want to touch on kind of one of these points that you just made, Alex, at the very end of your remarks. I want to talk a little bit about ethics here. You both are experts in government ethics, have worked and written extensively on the topic, and I don't think it's controversial to say that we're in the midst of a crisis in government ethics today, not only at the Supreme Court, but across multiple government institutions. And so can you help us understand this landscape that we're in right now, how we found ourselves here, and what are some of the possible ways out? I'll start with you, Alex, and then kick it over to Norm.
Yeah, I think we've had a failure of accountability as a structural matter in our country for a long time that has led us to this place where people with power and money feel like they can do anything without any recourse. It's been worsened by more damage from the Roberts Court, frankly, and some of these structural constitutional insularities that they've created for themselves But I think we've got a two-tiered system of justice in this country, right? We've got people going to jail and prison for extended periods for minor crimes. And then you've got people like the ones that architected the financial collapse in 2008 that didn't even get a slap on their wrist. And so I think, it's not a partisan thing. It's been a failure of accountability across the board. I think there was one really big mistake in the transition from out of the attempted insurrection, the attempted theft of the election and our democracy in 2020, 21 that Norb described, which was a desire from everybody in the world, but particularly establishment Democratic leadership, to just kind of erase the Trump era, pretend it hadn't happened, wish it away, wave a magic wand and wish that we could have the old world back. But it wasn't coming back. And norms don't work that way. We can't just have one side respecting norms while the other defies them. And so I think there was a real failure of aggressive accountability under Garland, particularly at Justice. And then from the Senate, when we learned over the course of the last 2 years of the biggest Supreme Court corruption scandal in US history, and where Democratic leaders failed to use all of the tools at their disposal to ensure accountability and provide reforms that could rebalance power, hold the powerful accountable. I think that's enough on that for now. And Norm is really the expert on ethics, so I'll give it to Norm.
Well, I think it's a favorable moment for us to have the ethics conversation, because for the first time, I mean, obviously the ethics have been so abysmal, right? They've been absolutely sickening. But for the first time in the past couple weeks, the ethics issues have been breaking through because of crypto. And Nancy is doing such a fantastic job of putting our links in the chat. I issued a big report. She was my deputy when I was the ethics czar in the White House, and I've brought her with me to every organization since. I lure her over sooner or later. Our vice president of ethics and accountability, Ginny Cantor at Democracy Defenders Fund. She came to me weeks and weeks ago. We have to do a big report on Trump's crypto conflicts and corruption. I'm like, nobody cares. Let's file another lawsuit. She's like, no, 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 no. And of course, she was right. And it's kind of exploded. The guy has almost 40% of his net worth in crypto. And I don't know how this happens in the zeitgeist, but suddenly people realized a week and a half ago, there's great New York Times reporting by Eric Lipton. I've been in heavy TV rotation with Eric because I have our report. He has his New York Times reporting. And suddenly people woke up. What? You can invest billions in Trump crypto companies, coins, if you're a foreign government. And what? UAE is making a big investment in World Liberty Financial. What? Trump still has held a financial interest. What? He's listed on the website of the company among the personnel. So, it is a scandal. It should be a scandal. It is broken through. This is the most unethical administration. I litigated against the unethical conduct and the conflicts in the first Trump term a lot. They're tiddlywinks. Those Trump hotel rooms, some Saudi prince booking a block of Trump hotel rooms, or Trump golf reservations. I mean, that's nothing compared to the sums at stake with crypto. He's regulating crypto so he can dial down the regulation to benefit himself. There's foreign government involvement with vast sums. It's so shocking, and it's paradigmatic of many, many other conflicts and ethics issues in the administration. Fortunately, once again, people are waking up. I'm not sugarcoating it. He lost the first round. There's 1,400-day rounds to go. The damage is vast. The ethics and conflicts damage that he's doing is vast. But much better that we haven't suddenly an awake public in the United States and around the world. I get press calls from all over the world about this. And the Democrats, if I may say so, have woken up. Look at the unified opposition to the crypto bill, the Genius Act, that was in Congress today. The Democrats blocked it in the Senate because it doesn't protect against these conflicts, among other flaws. So you're seeing much more forceful uh, awareness across every area.
Yeah, if I could just chime in before we move on, I wanted to second that. This is the zeitgeist, right? And it explains people's disgust with the corruption and the breakdown of our institutions. It is responsible for why we're here, why so many people are checking out. And when you run the polls, I think it's very much underappreciated. Corruption is always one or two. And it's an issue that people can win on. It's not just a important issue priority for voters and citizens. It's a character defining trait if you can start to run against corruption and back that up. And I shared a newsletter or a post I wrote for Norm's excellent publication, The Contrarian, with some polling results that back this up, and really was encouraging pro-democracy elected officials to pick up this mantle and really drive it, because it's not only important, but it's super popular.
Yeah, and I think people don't really appreciate some of the things that you both just mentioned. I don't think people have fully grasped the implications of Trump's ties to crypto. Like during the inauguration, he held an entire crypto ball for crypto bros from across the country to come into DC. And I think that shedding light on some of this information is so important because, like you said, Alex, it plays well with voters as well. It's important to voters. And so I'm glad that y'all are making sure that people are aware of it. Let's talk a little bit about the fight back, not only during these 100 days, but moving forward, and what that looks like. You both mentioned the withdrawal of the nomination of January 6th defender Ed Martin for the post of U.S. Attorney. Can you tell us a little bit more about who Ed Martin is, why this is an important office, and what helped to lead to Trump withdrawing his nomination? Let me start with Norm.
Well, as as we sit here, Ed Martin he was defeated for Senate confirmation, but he's been appointed to serve as the Associate Deputy Attorney General. He'll be in charge of the weaponization team, this supposed abuse of government powers to go after Trump. It's just, we call it law enforcement and constitutional activity. And the pardon attorney, so he can give more pardons to the violent January 6th insurrectionists. So they found a workaround. And Jeanine Pirro will be the new acting U.S. attorney in D.C. So that's the good news and the bad news, because Jeanine Pirro is a ridiculous appointment, and Ed Martin, by putting him in DOJ, by doubling down, Trump is not getting the message. His own party doesn't want him to engage in these sports and frolics, these detours from the things he got elected to do. So that is what has created this downward spiral of Donald Trump, where he's gone down below 40, at or below 40% in the polls, historic lows for this point in a new presidency. He doesn't get it. He's surrounded by sycophants, so they don't tell him when he's wrong. They double down. Amir, He's taken my security, he and his colleagues have taken my security clearance away 3 times. I don't know if it's mental instability and he's forgotten that he took it away, or if he takes it away and then, because I sue him so much, he whispers, turn Norm's security clearance back on. I take it away again. Makes me feel good. But whatever
The
the
security
explanation
blanket.
is, it's his, yes. Security clearance blanket.
Right.
Exactly right. Whatever the explanation is, there's a severe failure to see that they lost the first 100 days and to course correct, and to just take Ed Martin when your own party has repudiated him, and the same day to stick him in DOJ and bring another. It's a brilliant move to appoint Janine Pirro, because the other Fox host, Pete Hegseth, who's at the Pentagon, has done such a terrific job. I mean, they're not getting the signal. Now, look, I want to be very clear. I want to be very, very clear. The damage is great. Trump has a lot of power. He's doing a tremendous amount of harm, but the backlash is great also. Yes, he's flooded the zone. It's had a horrific effect, but flooding the zone has been met with the equal and opposite reaction. I'll leave you with one other thought about Ed Martin, Janine Pirro, and Trump's personnel moves and backlash. Donald Trump's excesses have elected his adversaries all over the world. In Canada, he resuscitated the Liberals and Mark Carney. In Australia, he did the same thing, got additional traction. They were down in the polls, his adversaries. They won, Albanese. Today, you got a never Trump Pope. The guy has, look at his social media, Pope Leo. It's
Right.
all disagreements with Trump and Vance's cruelties. So, this is not in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, they nationalized that race. What does the Wisconsin Supreme Court race have to do with Trump and Musk? But the theme of the race was the people versus Musk. They won in a landslide, 10 points. Donald Trump is setting up his own political demise.
Alex, did you want to jump in there to add anything?
I could add a few things just on Ed Martin and why it's so important. This is a huge victory. Like I cannot overstate how important this is. It's just a U.S. attorney. These aren't usually controversial appointments. They didn't even have a hearing for him because they didn't want. I mean, they would have looked really bad if they'd had that hearing. But we don't even typically have hearings for U.S. attorneys, so it wasn't out of the ordinary. But Martin is uniquely dangerous, and it's troubling that he'll still be at the Justice Department doing all of that actual weaponization of government. But in his short tenure as the interim U.S. attorney, he was the tip of the spear for the abuse of government power by the Trump administration, threatening people with criminal prosecution, defaming people. He even sent a criminal investigative inquiry to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer based on criticisms of Supreme Court justices he has made in the past. So just a deeply dangerous guy with a really, really shady set of associates. Was involved in January 6th dry runs, represented numerous January 6th defendants, one of whom he was actually representing when he dismissed the case against him pursuant to Trump's pardon in a clear violation of his own legal ethics obligations. And has a deep background in right-wing white Christian nationalist politics. He's part of Steve Bannon's War Room movement. He's got deep ties to Leonard Leo, has tried to break the judicial system in Missouri going back to 2005 or so. So really bad guy, really, really huge win that we got him defeated in the same week that we helped democracy prevail in North Carolina. Just really outstanding week.
Yeah, and that's another really big win that Alex just mentioned, North Carolina Supreme Court race, which was the last race from 2024 that was still pending, and a long legal saga that I won't dive into right now, but a federal court finally ordered that North Carolina certify the election to declare Allison Riggs the winner and undermine the arguments of the other side that said that we should throw out thousands of ballots. And so a big week for us this week to help protect and advance our democracy. We're coming up on time, and so I want to give you both an opportunity to close us out. There have been a bunch of questions submitted about, how do we keep ourselves from being overwhelmed during this time? There is consistently a new headline in the news about something that we never could have imagined happening in this country. And so I want to pose the question to you both. How do you keep yourselves from being overwhelmed, and how do you stay motivated? And then what are some ways for our audience members, for ordinary citizens around the country to respond all that's coming at us with an eye towards staying the course for at least 4 years, because it's a marathon and not a sprint. Let me start off with Alex.
I think self-care in a time like this and community care is just of paramount importance. I don't always live up to that ideal with my sleep and exercise regimen, but it's just so important. We're not of the mentality that we can ignore any of this stuff and pick our battles. These are all important battles. They all affect people, real people, and people are suffering because of each of these cruel actions of this regime. And so we can't afford to, pick and choose. We need to fight. It doesn't mean all of us can fight every battle. And so I think, for everyday folks that want to get involved with this work, it's figuring out what you can do. I saw a comment in the chat, what can ordinary folks do? Like, we're not all lawyers. I think actually that's been one of the biggest things that has been holding us back, particularly as they have stolen our Constitution and have weaponized it against us and made us think that only lawyers can have ownership of it and read it. I mentioned earlier, it's a lay document. If the Supreme Court holds, and I don't think it will, that birthright citizenship is not in the Constitution, we don't have to take that as like the rule of law, because we can read our own Constitution and say that is wrong. And so practically speaking, I think what that means is whether it's your interests outside of work or your work skills, everybody has a thing they can do to help contribute to this. Even if it's, showing up to the protests that other organizations are putting together, or even just, being in your community as I think what's happening is, with the fear and helplessness and people, retreating into the shadows in the fear of an authoritarian tyrant, we have to recognize that is the intent of authoritarianism. That's the authoritarian agenda, is to bring us to that place. And so whatever we can do to help bring people out of that, start conversations with people that don't agree with you, make sure that the people in your lives are doing okay. That's kind of my rambling sentiment towards this moment. Take care of ourselves, fight.
Norm, how do you stay motivated? What is your advice to people who want to fight back?
For a litigator, lawsuits are like Prozac. I mean, it's litigation Prozac. It's the best therapy. I sue. I'm in court. I kind of given it all up. I was an ambassador. I was a scholar. I wrote 6 books. But, called back onto the battlefield at age 64. I love it. So I stay motivated by fighting. We published a piece on the Contrarian. We listed more than a dozen ways, 15 ways, I think, that each and every one of you can engage in the battle. The lawsuits, I'll end where I started. The lawsuits were in our grade, checking the Trump wrongdoing, but the sparks that they threw off triggered the political outcomes, like in Wisconsin, that landslide. And now the political leaders are motivated, another spark. And the biggest spark of all, public protest. There's been more. Erica Chenoweth, I was just on a panel with her at Harvard. She tracks the protests. There's been more frequency, more size, more duration, more diversity, more intensity, and more sheer numbers of protests and participants than in 2017. Wow. So and I go to them even though I'm doing all the other stuff. So that's something all of us can do.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much, Norm Eisen, Alex Aronson. Really, really appreciate you both joining us. And thank you to the hundreds of people who joined us tonight. We really appreciate your attendance. Keep an eye out for the next Fair Fight Together series event. We look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Take care.